Hey everyone, welcome to our first class. I mean, not actually our first class because we had a class already, but our first class where, we did real work in the first class, but this is the first class where you need your computer to do, you needed your computer in the first class where because we were on Zoom. This is the first class where we're actually going to run some code. How about that? In the first class, we kind of laid out the course, talked about some of the things that are going to be important. One thing that came up was this idea of a server, a web server, but in general, a program that serves, I guess. And the reason why I feel like it's a good place to start is because of all the kinds of projects we were looking at, these networked art pieces, for example. There's a server kind of is a recurring theme, it's a part, whether you're making a web page that has some reactive dynamic part or an installation that fetches some remote data, or maybe you're building something that collects data, all these things kind of end up having a server as a part of them. So we're going to look at how to make a server in this first class, and then talk about how to deploy a server and how to connect it up to other things. And I promise that it's not actually that difficult, and that you'll find that it's extremely rewarding to build your own. I hope you find it's extremely rewarding to build your own server and to deploy it. So to do all this, we're going to be using a couple of things that you have to get installed right off the bat and before you try to do any of this. And so first of all, I'm here in the command line, in the command prompt, and I'm using something called iterm. iterm. And that's a separate application you have to install. You don't have to install this. You can also use Terminal, the built-in command line tool for Mac OS. It doesn't really matter. On Windows, you can use something called mingw is what I install, or I've also seen it called git bash. You can use the Windows command prompt, but I find it much harder to use, and throughout the course, I'll just be using a Unix style command prompt like this. So follow the whatever installation instructions are specific to your platform, and then once you've got a command line like this, we can kind of go from there. The other two important things that we're going to need are git and node. So git is what we're going to use for version control, more on that soon, and node is the JavaScript environment that we'll use for writing applications. An application, we were talking about interfaces a lot in the first class, and an application, it feels like you know what an application is already, right? Slack is an application, Google Chrome is an application, Instagram is an application. We haven't necessarily had a formal definition. An application is basically an interface between you, the user, and the operating system itself. So the operating system provides, I feel like it's gotten way more theoretical than I wanted it to right off the bat. Point is that an application, the operating system lets you do things like save files, make connections, connect to keyboards and the keyboard and the mouse. And applications use all of those to build their sort of experience. And Node is a tool that lets you do that. It lets you talk to the operating system using JavaScript. That is important, but not important to remember right now. What that means will become obvious in the weeks and months ahead. So you need Git and you need Node. There are instructions to install these that you should follow online. I'm not going to go through it here, but you should know that you've got everything right if you come to the command line like this and you type git version. It's still early, haven't warmed up my fingers yet, and node version. And you can see the version of Git and the version of Node that have been installed. So once you've got all that, we're ready to go. All right, so I'm going to start. So in case you haven't spent much time on the command line before, there's a lot to know, but not a lot that you need to know up front. Probably a command you'll be using all the time is ls. ls just lists all the files in the current directory. pwd tells you which directory you're in. That's the path, so the folder hierarchy that takes you to where you are. And I'm just going to cd changes to a directory. So by doing cd nyu, for example, now I'm in my nyu directory, pwd, and you can see that nyu is in the path now. cd dot takes you up one level. So now I'm back in my home directory. So I'm going to do cd NYU, and I already tried to record this once and failed, so I have a directory here already that is the one that I want to use, or maybe I don't. Yeah, I don't see it. So I'm going to make a directory with mkdir called pip 2021. Programming is possible 2021, and everything that I do in this in these lectures is going to be in this directory. So I'm going to make a directory now, another one, make dir, and we'll call this. I'll just call this node intro. And cd node intro, and if I do pwd, now you can see that we're in users, my name, NYU, and in this node intro. Oh, I didn't do it right. Okay, so I thought I was going to be in the pip 2021 directory. I'm not, so I'm going to cd dot dot. And now we can look at the rm command. So rm rf, this removes, so rm removes a file or folder. R means remove recursively, so if you're removing a folder, remove everything in it. And F means remove a folder even if the folder is not empty. So if I do rm, well, hold on, let's see first what's in this directory. So if I do, so I don't want this, I don't want the pip, the node intro directory. So I'm going to do rm rf node intro. And another thing too, you can push tab. If you get the first part of a file or folder right, you can push tab and it will fill in the rest. So now I'm going to cd pip 2021, make dir node intro, cd node intro, pwd, and you can see we're in this hierarchy. Okay, took a little while, but that's basically all of the basically all the command line stuff that you'll really need to know. Except for the stuff specific to Git and Node that we'll talk about in a second. So what I'm going to do now is make this into a Git repository just by typing git init. This will create an empty Git repository. And now what you should be doing so most of the homework that we'll do from this point going forward, you'll need to submit it by putting it in, by sending me a link to a Git repository. I'm not going to take a zip file full of all a zip folder full of all your files or anything like that. So we could talk a little bit about how to use Git and kind of what Git does. The idea with Git is, well, and I'm only going to talk through it briefly because there's much better documentation out there on how to use Git and kind of what Git does. So I'm just going to go through kind of the bare minimum that you'll need to get up and running and to work with this, work with Git in this class. So if you don't already have an account on, you probably don't want to read my, probably should close my Slack, huh? If you want to, what was I saying? You should definitely get started by making an account on GitHub if you haven't already. So once you've made an account on GitHub, you can make a new repository, and each repository is kind of a root that contains all the files specific to a particular project. So I'm going to call this repository, let's call it pip 2021 node intro. I'm not going to give it a description. I'm not going to add a README. I'm not going to do any of this just yet. I'm just going to create the repository. And then Git will give me some options about how to set it up. So I've already run Git init here, so we have this Git repository locally. You don't have to do this. You can also start by making the repository in GitHub and then copying it locally by using git clone. But if you follow these instructions here, you'll see you'll see push an existing repository from the command line. So this is what we want to do in order to get this repository up to Git here. So we're trying to sync. What we want is for GitHub to be the remote repository that's a copy of what we have here. And then we'll keep the two in sync using git commands. So I'm just going to do exactly what Git says. I'm going to do, git remote add origin. This sets GitHub to be the remote origin that tracks my local one. Then I'm going to do git branch main, master not found. Oh, that's because I haven't made any commits yet. So I'm just going to do ls, and there's nothing in here. So right now I'm going to put a file in here. I'm just going to put a README in here. So I'm using Visual Studio Code as my code editor for this class, and I highly, highly recommend it. It's really, really nice. You don't have to use VS Code. You can use Sublime Text. You can use whatever you like. But for all the examples going forward, I'm going to be using VS Code. And there is some tooling, some kind of tools and plugins and stuff that go with VS Code that make it a really nice environment to program in, and I am going to be taking advantage of some of those in this class. So I say all that because I've set things up so that I can just type code dot references the current directory, and this will let me open up a new window of Visual Studio Code that's pointed at the current directory. So you see here the directory name is node intro, and that's the same as the folder that we're in because Visual Studio Code has opened this folder. So I'm going to make a new file, and I'm going to call this readme.md. MD stands for Markdown, and you can see the icon next to readme MD here has changed. That reflects the fact that this is VS Code recognizes that this is a Markdown file because the extension is MD. So Markdown has a syntax that is associated with it. It's a very simple syntax, and you can just use it to describe kind of what how a file should look. So if I type node intro for pip 2021, this is how you use Node to make a server. And what's nice about VS Code actually is you can click this little dude over here to open a preview, and this is what it will look like when this Markdown is rendered in an environment that understands how to render Markdown, which GitHub does. So here's my first README. I want to commit it. So if you just do, now that we've got git installed, we can do git status here in our command line, and it will show you on branch master, no commits yet, one untracked file. It means a file that you haven't put in version control yet. So I'm going to do git add dot. This adds all of the files in the current directory, because remember dot is the current directory, adds all the files in the current directory, including subdirectories, into version control. And if I do git status now, you'll see that git is ready to commit. So I've made some changes to README. I added a README file. So Git would call those staged changes. So these are changes that if I commit now, those will be in version control. One of the nice things about Git is that if you do commit stuff, you can always walk it back, and there's a nice tree of all the changes you've made. So in general, you don't have to, committing isn't the same as, it does overwrite what you've done before, but you can always go back, which is really nice. So I'm just going to do git commit. And when you commit, you have to say -m to write a commit message. And I'm going to do git commit initial, I'll call it add readme. Okay, and now if I run that command again that GitHub wanted me to do, git branch -m main, this is renaming my my master branch to main. It's more, it used to be standard to call the kind of central branch of a Git repository master, but the language is shifting to main these days, which I think is actually really nice. So now that we've changed, so we've made a commit, we renamed our master branch to main, and now I'm going to push this main branch up to GitHub by running this git push u origin main. So now if I reload this page, you'll see that it's got my README in here. So Git and my repository are now in sync. I can come back to the README and do in this, so let's write description. We will make an Express server, and that's fun. So save this, and if I run git status again, git status, you'll see that Git sees that we've modified this README file. Hang on one second. Git will see that we've modified this README file. So I can do git add dot, and if I do git status, now I've staged the README file, and I can do git commit m, added some stuff to the README. README. And then again, git push origin main. and that pushes my changes. That synchronizes this local branch with a remote branch. Okay, so that's the very basics of Git. That's most of what we'll need to know. We're not going to talk about branching right now, but when you're working on, for now in the beginning, we're working on our own projects, it's probably fine to just use the main branch. We'll talk about branching a little bit later, but at the same time, I highly recommend reviewing Git, reviewing how branching works, looking at merging branches and forking branches and this kind of thing. Okay, so now we're ready to get started. And the way we're going to get started is we're going to start just by making a node application. Making a node application is very simple. You just start by writing a JavaScript file. I'm going to make a new file here called, let's call this file, what should we call it? Let's call it basic.js, where JS is the JavaScript extension. So basic.js is just a basic node file. I'm just going to start by doing console.log hi. That's the whole file. Now back in our command line, you can do, we should have node installed. If you type node followed by the name of a node script or JavaScript file, the node kind of application runner will run the file that you've given it. So if I do node basic.js, it runs that file, and you can see it's printed out hi down here in the command line. So that's really nice. Now, of course, if node could just print to the command line, it wouldn't be that exciting, but it can do lots of other stuff. So for example, we can learn a little bit about the system that you're running on. And we can do that by pulling in a node module, which is some functionality that node uses to link bits of code together. There's a few modules that come built into node. One of them is called OS. So I can do const OS equals require OS. This might be a little small, huh? I mean, if you watch it full screen, it's probably not that bad, but maybe that's a bit easier to see. Const OS is require OS. OS is a library it's built-in module in Node, and if I make a new line here, I can say something like console.log. I'm going to use the well, let's just do it this way first. It looks like you're running a, and then plus to concatenate this string with os dot. You can see like how nice it is here. Visual Studio Code is going to tell us a little bit of, it's going to give us some autocomplete with all of the functions that are in the OS library. So I can do os.platform, call that function, and then do plus space machine. So this will tell, when you run this program, it will tell you what kind of machine you're running. If I run node basic, it says, hi, it looks like you're running a Darwin machine. Darwin is the name of the open source kernel that macOS runs. So it's telling us correctly that we're running on a Darwin machine, or that I'm running on a Darwin machine. It might say something different if you're running a Linux machine or if you're running a Windows machine or something like that. Cool. So this is the absolute kind of very basic of what Node does. You just run this Node command and then it will run through the file that you provide. So one of the things that's really, really nice about Node is that you can pull in other repositories. And in fact, there's a big kind of, what's the word? I was going to say repository of repositories. I guess that's what it is. There's a repository of repositories that you can access through the Node package manager. And if you go to npmjs.com, you can search through all of the repositories that are available here. So as you can see, there are many, 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 many packages. These do all kinds of stuff between, helping you render stuff in the browser, implementing different protocols. There's just a huge variety of stuff that's available here. Testing, working with, as you can see, working with robotics, just a really wide variety of different bits of functionality available. And it's very easy to pull them in and use them. And in fact, one, I can see a popular one here that we'll be using in a moment is this Express one. So in order to make use of these, we have to use something called npm, the Node Package Manager. When you install Node, npm should be installed by default, and if you do npm version, you should see which version of npm you have installed. So the way npm works is one of the things that npm can do is add dependencies to your project. So when you, say for example, you wanted to use the Express library for writing web servers, which we will in a second, in your project, you would use npm to say, okay, my project depends on this. And then whenever somebody else wants to use your project, they would be able to install all the dependencies that they need to run it just by referencing a file that npm creates. So it's very easy to share projects and to manage the dependencies that your project has in this way. Sounds very abstract. It'll become much more concrete as we get through it. If I do npm, but for all that to work, first you have to tell npm to turn the directory that you're currently in into an npm package. So I'm just going to do npm init, just like we did git init before. This will run through a bunch of ask you a bunch of questions for how to set things up. You can change all these later, but I'm going to name my package pip intro. Well, let's call this, pip 2021 intro. Version 100 is fine. Description I'll leave blank. Entry points I will leave basic.js for now. Test command we can skip. Git repository, that's fine. Author, me, Sam. I'll do @staricaj. And then the license probably doesn't matter unless you're writing some, important licensed code for your corporate overlord or something. And as you can see, as soon as this finishes running, it creates this file called package.json. And now, just by having this package.json file in the roots of your folder, npm knows that this is a npm package. You can go ahead and commit all this. So I'll do git add dot, git commit m initialized npm package. And just for fun, we can push that as well. So with this package set up, we can now add dependencies to our repository. To our project. So the way we do that is if I do npm install, the install command will search for and install packages that match the name that you're giving it. So if I give npm install chance, for example, chance is an npm package that will give you a bunch of random-ish data, but random-ish data in a way that looks really convincing. So if you need to get just a random street address, a random name, a random latitude and longitude, a random age, the chance library is really good for that. So it's good for like filling in test data or seeing how your application handles information that looks like normal data, that kind of thing. You'll also notice that in our package.json, two new files got created. First, a bunch of things happened actually. Package.json got this new dependencies entry here in its JSON. This dependencies declares what are the packages and what is the version of the package on which this project depends. So you can see that we're depending on chance at a version of at least 1.1.7. This package lock.json file also got created that lets npm know exactly what package got installed and where it came from. And finally, this node modules folder got created. Now, this is very important. The node modules folder is where all of your installed dependencies go. You will not usually ever modify any file in node modules directly. Node modules is something that npm creates as it installs all the dependencies that your project needs. Now, one really important consequence of that is that you never want to add node modules to your Git repository. It's generally a mistake to do that unless you really know what you're doing. So one really nice thing that we can do to get around that is to create so I want to check in, I want to commit package and package lock, but I don't want to commit node modules. A nice way to do that is to create a file called .gitignore. Anything that you put in this .gitignore file will be ignored by Git. So if I write node modules here, that means that you can see immediately node modules goes gray in VS Code. And that's because it knows that once I add gitignore, package lock, and package, or really once I add gitignore, Git will know not to include node modules. So I can do something like git status, and already you can see that node modules is no longer in the changes not staged for commit. And in fact, I can just do git add dot and git status again, and we'll see that gitignore has been staged, package lock has been staged, package has been staged, but not node modules, which is exactly what I want. So now I can do git commit m add chance dependency, and that adds that dependency, or rather we've committed those changes now to Git, and we can do git push and push those changes up to GitHub. Okay, so that has added this dependency on chance, and it's also created and we've also pushed those changes in our package and package lock. So how do we use this chance library? It's exactly the same as using a built-in node library like OS. We can do const chance equals require chance. How exactly these libraries work sort of depends on the specific library. So OS, as you can see, had a function called platform. Chance doesn't work quite the same way, and this is something that becomes clear if you search chance npm, for example. You can see kind of how chance works. If I go to full docs, you can see that the way usage, just show me some flipping code, please. Node. Yeah, so it's something like this. npm install chance, you load the chance library, and then you create a chance object. So this chance library, I'm gonna do, so we've loaded the dependency here, chance, and I can do const myChance equals new chance. So this is the library, and this is the object that we've created. You can create as many of these chance objects as you want. This is a quirk of how this library works. But what we can do now, having made this object, is we can do something like this console.log. Your new fake name is myChance dot. You can see all this nice stuff. We got random altitude, random area code, birthday. Let's go with random name. Okay, and if we run basic.js now, so we just do node basic.js. It says, hi, it looks like you're running a Darwin machine, correct? And your new fake name is Donald Atkins. So that's pretty handy. So that's allowed us to require this chance library and to use it in our node project. All right. So with chance installed, the last thing that I want to show you about here before we get into using Express is how to debug something like this. Obviously, debugging is an important thing that might, as you kind of like write more and more complex node packages, you write more and more complex node projects, you might end up running into some issues you'd like. So you can always just, of course, write console log to print something out. But if you set things up right, you can debug this program and kind of see what the state of things is while the program's actually running. So say, for example, instead of writing mychance.name here with the 2 parentheses to actually call the name function, I had just done this, mychance.name. And you'll see now if I run this, it says your new fake name is, and then this, right? Function, options, options, init options. So it's printed out the context, rather the content of the function called name. This is probably not what we wanted, and maybe we want to. Although it's kind of a cool new name. If this was your full name, that would be interesting. It would mean you had an interesting life, I'm sure. But if we didn't want our program to behave this way, we might try to debug it and see what's going on. So how do we do that? There's a couple ways. The first way is you can just run node basic.js --inspect-brk. And this opens up the inspector, or rather allows you to connect to the node application via a node inspector, and also breaks, which is to say it stops the application right when it starts to run. So if I push enter now, you'll see that it didn't work, and that's because I did it wrong. You actually have to go node --inspect brk and then basic.js. And it says debugger listening, because right now the application is at a breakpoint. So it's not executing right now, it's waiting to execute, and it's waiting for you to connect an inspector. So an easy way to do that is to come into Chrome and go to Chrome://inspect. And this will take you to the Chrome node inspector. And you can see right here that it's ready to let you inspect a node instance that's running basic.js. So if you click inspect, it'll take you to this inspector. And there's a whole bunch of stuff here that is not relevant to what we're doing that I'm going to close. This is just not relevant, not relevant, not relevant, not relevant, not relevant. And in fact, some of that I might need to block out later, but that's okay. So where are we? If you look over here in the call stack, this is where we are in the application. So this is all some stuff that Node has done to run our application. If I click here, basic.js, here's where in the program it is right now. Now on the left here, when I hover over it, where you see the line number, I can throw a breakpoint right here on line 10. And then up here, these are the commands that continue execution. So if I push this step button, for example, Node will go to the next line of execution. In that case, it's this line, line 2. If I push the play button, it will resume running the script until it gets to the next breakpoint. So I'll hit that button, and it's broken here at the breakpoint that I just put in. And down here in the console, you can see, first of all, you can see what Node has printed. Hang on, I got my water. You can see what Node has printed, but you can also type in variables and see what the contents of those variables are. So right now we're about to print out your new fake name is mychange.name. And if I come down here and type mychange. I called it change, not chance. Interesting choice. Anyway, if I call it mychange. If I look at mychange.name, you can see down here that it's going to print out, it doesn't print out a string, it prints out a function. And this might be enough for you to say, oh, of course, I shouldn't be printing mychance.name, I should be calling the name function. And that will actually give you, as you can kind of see down here, a new random name. And it gives you a new random name every time you call it. Clara Bowman, it's a cool name. So this is one way to debug that uses the Chrome debugger. Another nice way to do it is using VS Code itself. So over here, there's this little button that says run with a little bug next to it. If you click on that, because we haven't set anything up here yet, you have to set up your debug. You have to tell VS Code how you want it to run your application. If I click run and debug, it'll give you a bunch of environments here. We're using Node, so we'll click Node.js and not use the legacy version, but the preview version. That just ran it. That's not what I wanted. You know what? I clicked the wrong thing. What I want is to create a launch JSON file. So I'm going to click that. That's what I meant to click on. And now it's this Node.js preview. And this is where you tell VS Code how you want it to run your program. And it's telling you, or you're telling it rather, that it's a Node program. That's what this PWA node means. And here's what it's actually going to run. It's going to run basic.js. So perfect. That looks exactly right. And you can change that. It's called launch program, but I'll just say run basic.js is the new name of this. And now up here, there's a little menu that has all the different configurations that we have, including run basic. So if I go back to my basic.js file, and now I can set breakpoints in VS Code. So I can put a breakpoint right here, hit run basic, and VS Code breaks right here. And there's another command prompt, very similar to what you get in Chrome, that will let me do my change.name and see the difference between the name and the function. So you can debug in Google Chrome, which is you can always do, even if you're not using VS Code. If you're using VS Code, you have this option to use the VS Code debugger. Has the same controls up here, you know, stop, start, walk to the next line, etc., that you have in Chrome. So two different ways to set up your debug, to do debugging. One, you just run with inspect break from the command line. The other, you run by setting up a configuration, you know, add configuration, and then finding node attach is the, or rather not node attach. If I do add configuration, node launch program. Yes, that's the one you want. And that will actually let you launch your node program. We'll be using this again in a second, so if you don't remember it right away, that's okay. Okay, cool. So there's, that was using Git, setting up an NPM package, and writing a basic file that uses a library that we loaded with NPM. So now we've got everything in place to get to the meat, the really important stuff, which is working with Express. I said get to the meat, but as a vegetarian person, I don't know that, I mean, but you can't really say like now we come to the braised tofu of the class. It doesn't really have the same weight as saying now we come to the meat of the class. This doesn't matter. So I wanted to commit all this, so I'll do git add dot and then git commit m added a launch config. Beautiful. So we're ready for Express. What is Express? Express is a tool that lets you make web servers. A web server is just a server. I mean, it's nothing more complicated than a server that lets you, a server is not more complicated than a server. A server is an application that will take requests from anywhere that is sending it requests, wherever it's been configured to be open to requests. It will accept them and then send back some information in response to that. Anytime you go to a web page, you're interacting with a web server. In fact, you're probably interacting with many web servers for most modern web pages. And in interacting with that web page, your browser says to the page, hey, can you please give me the contents of this page? And the page says, sure, here's Facebook.com, here's NewYorkTimes.com, whatever. So we're going to write our own server that gives us a lot of control over how exactly all that gets handled. So first, to do that, we're going to need to install Express. So I'm just going to do npm install Express. And this adds Express to our repository. If you jump into our dependencies now, you can see we've got a dependency on Chance and a dependency on Express. Package lock has been updated. Node modules has new stuff in it now. And now we're ready to use Express. I'm actually going to create a new file here and call it server.js. And this server is what we're actually going to use to run our Express server. So we're going to start pretty much in the way you'd expect, just by doing const express equals require Express. A quick word, you may have used processing before, processing P5.js, or maybe you've done some JavaScript programming before, and you may have seen variables declared like this, var express, or var whatever, rather than const express. In general, it's not really, you never really want to be using var anymore. It's more modern to use const and let. const for variables that won't change, and let for variables that will change. Var still has its uses, but most of the time you're okay with const and let. And there are a few complicated things related to scope that generally make let behave a bit more like what you'd expect. Anyway, if you still use var, it's probably fine. It won't necessarily affect your application, but if you see const and let, you just know that it's someone it's been written, it's a more modern version of JavaScript, or someone using a more modern style, I guess I should say. Okay, so once you've got Express, the next thing that you typically do is create an Express application. The way that works, so it's kind of similar to Chance, where we had there's a package called Chance, and there's also sorry, my brain stopped working. There's a repository called Chance. No, there's a a package called Chance, and you create an object that goes with it. Express is similar, so we can do const app equals express dot application. Is this how it works? No, is it? Creates an Express application. So you do it like this, I believe. Is that right? I need to look at some code. I'll be honest, this particular syntax gets away from me sometimes. All right, I'm going to cheat. Code, and I use. I'm going to cheat, I'm going to cheat, I'm going to cheat, and look at what it's supposed to be. Here we go. So yes, app use, app get, app listen. Okay, that's it. I got it. That's all I needed to know. So this is exactly the same actually as how we worked with the Chance library. You use the library to create this app, and this app is kind of a handle that we use to configure our server. So this creates an app handle that configures to configure our server. Cool. Now, what does this app do? The app there's two things you basically have to do in order for the app to do anything. The first is you have to implement some handlers. Now, what a handler looks like is something like this. App.get will configure a get handler for your application. Now, most of the time, get is the correct handler to use. There are other kinds of handlers. So what is this handler thing? The HTTP protocol, which is how your application or how your web page communicates with web servers, uses this HTTP protocol has different verbs associated with them. The two most common by far are get and post. Get is something that you use for most, if not all requests that simply want to fetch some information. So if you're fetching the contents of a web page, you'll use get. Post is used typically when you're pushing some new information. I think we'll look at that by the end of this discussion. And the handlers that we're writing here in Express configure which of the two you're actually going to be using. So when I write app.get, for example, I'm telling my Express application to add a new get handler. So the way that the syntax for this thing works is first you declare a string, which is the path that Express will use to, this is the path that Express will try to match in order to know which handler to use. So slash here means match the handler, slash means match the handler for a path with nothing in it. And the next argument to this is going to be a function that takes two arguments, a request and a response. The request is, I hope this, so we could write this another way. We could do function handler equals request response, and then implement our handler here, and then pass the handler function as the second argument to this getter. But this isn't nearly as common as just instead of defining the function name and using it like this, just writing an anonymous function down here. So what does this all mean? This means that when we navigate to, or when we send a GET request that has a path that's just a slash, the empty path, the function here is what will be called. And it will be called with two arguments. The request, which is the request that was sent to our server, and a response, and this is what we use to actually send something back to whoever sent us the request in the first place. So all we're going to do here is just do response.send you hello there. We'll be polite, enthusiastic, a little bit bubbly, I think is the energy we're giving off there. And then finally, to make this all go, you run a function on app called listen. So we do app.listen, passing a port at which to listen. So we're going to do port 3000, or you know what, maybe better is to do it like this, const port. You know what, let's do it like this. Const port equals 3000. And down here, we'll do app.listen port. And then after this, you pass a callback, so another function that will be called when the server has actually started listening. And we'll print console.log app listening on port. So port here is, of course, the variable port, which will be 3000. So this should print app listening on port 3000. So this is kind of the simplest possible Express application. These are the three big parts: creating the application, adding all your handlers. So add a handler for your function, and add a handler for the path, and finally start listening. So the big parts are creating the app, adding handlers, and then listening, which is what makes your server actually receive incoming requests. So I pop back to the terminal now, we can run this. I can run node server.js, and it says down here, app listening on port 3000. And now also you'll notice too that the server is still running. So when I come back over to Chrome, it's still running because the server is just waiting. It's waiting to receive requests and to do something with them. So what I'm going to do is go to a certain web page. I'm going to go to localhost :3000 because our server is listening on port 3000. Localhost means when you go to say when you go to github.com. Oh my God, github.com. When you go to github.com, your browser has to figure out a host name and a port to actually go to. I don't know if you've heard of something called DNS or service resolution or any one of these things before. Oh, interesting. My friend is doing some interesting work. Okay, I'll have to look at that later. Yeah, so your browser has to figure out what the host name and port are. The default port for web pages is port 80 or 443 for HTTP pages. Which means that you don't usually see the ports in websites that you visit because the browser just assumes the default. Because we're not using the default port, we have to put in 3000. And because this little local website that we're running hasn't actually registered a name somewhere, we have to tell it the host explicitly. So localhost 3000 is the explicit host and the explicit port, whereas with github.com, your browser has to look up the host name associated with github.com, and then it uses the default port. But anyway, this, for the time being, is the web address of our application. And if you visit the page, you can see it prints out hello there. So our server is actually getting this response, and then it's getting this request, sending it to this handler, and then sending back this response. So just like that, we've already written our own web server. Isn't that nifty? Just to make sure all the concepts, well, first of all, I should say, when you're ready to stop this server, you can't push enter, that won't do anything. You have to send it a signal to stop running the application, which you can do by holding down, on Mac anyway, holding down Control and pushing C. And that will send a signal to the application to tell it to stop running. So that kills the server, and if you come back to Chrome and push refresh, it'll say the site can't be reached. So to make sure all the concepts are sticking, let's add a debugger. Let's debug this application. I'm going to put a breakpoint here on line 9, and then I'm going to click on this debug thing and come up here and do add configuration. And the configuration I'm looking for is Node.js launch program. And the program that we're launching this time, it's not called app.js, it's called server.js. So now if I come back to, if I hit, I'm not going to do, sorry, you know what? Let's change the name of this VS Code launch.js. I don't want the name to be launch program, I want it to be launch server.js. If I come back to the debug tab and click on launch server.js and then hit play, the server is running now. Why can't I see the console? Why can't I see the debug console? I want the here we are, debug console. There we are. It says app listening on port 3000. Beautiful. So now I'm going to go back to my web page and reload the page. And you can see that we actually hit this breakpoint here in the handler, which is pretty cool. If you want to, you could print out the request and see what this request object that gets sent to you actually looks like. You can see the method here, get, that's the HTTP verb I was talking about. All the stuff is there. You'll notice that the page is still loading. That's because it's waiting for a response from the server. The response hasn't come back yet because we're stuck in this breakpoint. So I'm not going to torture the web page anymore. I'm just going to hit play. And that sends the response back, and the page, your web page, displays what it received, which is this string, hello there. Amazing. So that is a very, very basic web server. Now, probably we want to do a little bit more than just sending strings back, right? Like probably we want to send actual web pages. Now, to send an actual web page, there's a few ways to do it. The one that we're going to look at right here in class is as simple as sending the contents of an HTML file. So what I'm going to do is in our directory here, I'm going to create a new folder called templates. And I'm going to make one called index.html. And now I'm just going to put in here a very simple HTML file. So I'm just going to write something like HTML and then body, and then in here just like let's put a h1 for a header, my great page, and then a paragraph. Welcome to my great page. I'm going to save this. And now the question is, how do we have I want our server to send this page back when it gets a request at the / path, at this root path. Well, to do that, it's not that tricky. All we're going to do is we're going to, so what we need to do is instead of sending the hello there string, we just send the contents of this file, right? So to do that, we need to read in those file contents somehow, and we're going to make use of another Node library. So I said that Node was an application, a tool for writing applications. One of the things applications can do is, well, what an application does is interface with the operating system, and it does things like read and write files. So for that, there is a built-in Node module called fs. So I'm going to do const fs equals require fs that will do things like read and write files. from the operating system. So down here in slash now, I can do fs dot. So instead of sending hello there, what I'll do is this. I'll do fs, I'll do this, const file contents equals fs.read file sync. There's two read file methods. One of them uses a callback. The other is what we call synchronous. We'll talk a lot more about synchronous versus asynchronous functions in an upcoming class. So we're just going to do this read file sync function, and we're going to read dot slash templates slash index.html. This reads the whole contents of this file into this variable as a string. And then we can just do response.send file contents. Now, if I start my server back up, which I can do either by running node server.js or by hitting this launch server.js button here in VS Code, either one's fine. Server's running, Command-Shift-Y to launch the debug console. App listening, we can go to localhost 3000. I accidentally downloaded this page. It's because, okay, so I did response.send, and this is not exactly what you want to do. The problem here is that, well, you know what, let's see if we can figure out what the problem here is. So what I wanted was for the contents to be displayed here in the web page. Instead, it created a download. And if I show what's in this, if I show this download and look at its contents, you can see that it actually does contain the page that we expected. Let's see if we can debug and figure out what's going on. So I'm going to come back to VS Code, throw a breakpoint here, hit launch server.js, and then reload the page. The breakpoint gets hit here, and let's see what file contents looks like. So I print file contents. So what we were expecting was a string, right? To see the actual contents of the file. But instead we have this buffer of 108 numbers. That's because we told Node how to read this file, but we didn't tell it how to interpret it. We just told it to read it as in the way that a computer reads a file, which is just as a bunch of numbers. And what it gave us was just that, a bunch of numbers. It did, in the frustrating way that computers do, it did exactly what we told it to do, which was the wrong thing. To fix this, we need to use a second argument with fs read file sync. We need to, I'm going to stop the server, we need to pass in a second argument, which is just UTF-8 in quotations. This tells Node how to or really it tells the fs read file sync function how to interpret the contents of that file. Specifically, it says interpret the contents of this file as a UTF string, where UTF is a string format that's very commonly used. So now if we try this again, I'm going to throw the breakpoint here, launch the server, app is listening, I'm going to reload the page, and now if I print file contents, you'll see that we actually get a string as opposed to a bunch of numbers. I'm going to clear this breakpoint and continue, and back in the browser, now we've got our great page. Welcome to my great page. Isn't that fun? I hope that at this point you're kind of starting to see maybe a similarity in the pattern between writing a simple Express server like this and something like a processing or a P5 sketch. So in P5 you had, there was kind of two functions that did everything, right? There was a setup function and there was a draw function. And the draw function is a bit like what's happening inside these handlers. So inside this handler is kind of where all the stuff really happens. And outside before the handler is where you can sort of set things up. I say that because I'm going to, in processing, for example, you might have some shape that you're drawing every frame. And if you want to keep track of that shape over time, you might make a variable to hold that shape and then update that shape as every time you draw it. So maybe you have like a image or something that's moving, a sprite or an animation or something that moves as you draw it, and you declare the variable outside of your draw function so that it still exists, it's still in scope when the draw actually happens. And that's similar to what we're going to do here, where when we use this server. So here's what I mean by that. What I'm going to try to do now is I'm going to try to make our page a little bit dynamic. So I'm going to implement a very hot 1990s web feature, which is adding a visit counter to this page. So how is that going to work? Well, what I'm going to do first is create a local variable here called visit count. And you'll notice that I've changed the, instead of saying visit count equals, or rather instead of using const, I'm using let. That's because I'm going to update the contents or the value of this variable later, although I am initializing it to 0. So what I'm going to do is something like this. When somebody visits the page, I'm going to do visit count equals visit count plus 1. And then somehow I want to show the person visiting the page how many times they visited. Well, the key to that is to do something to the file contents after we've loaded them. So between here where we load the file contents and here where we send it back to whoever has visited the page, we have the opportunity to change what the file contents are. Now, I'm going to make it a bit easier for us by jumping into the index.html page here and changing this around a little bit. So I'm going to add another paragraph, and I'm going to say in this paragraph, this page has been visited. Visit times. So right here, I wrote parenthesis or %% visit %%%. I'm creating a very easy to find and hopefully easy to remember kind of hook in the page that we can then later find and replace. So what the idea is, I'm going to take this page, find and replace that string, and use it to every time. So now every time somebody visits this page, we can give them back a slightly different page. So right here, we'll do file contents dot replace, and we're going to replace, and replace takes 2 arguments, the string to replace and the string to replace it with. So we're replacing visit with the visit count. Right? So if this all works the way we expect, we should be able to launch our server, which again, you can do here or by coming to the terminal and running node server.js. And I'm going to visit the page, reload this. It said the page has been visited %% visit times. I wonder why that happened. Let's take a look at our code. So I'm going to throw a breakpoint Let's throw a breakpoint here. And now I'm going to visit this page one more time by reloading it. Okay, so we're here. Let's see how our variables look. I'm going to look at file contents. Okay, there it is. And I see %% visit. So far, so good. I'm going to step over this line. And now let's look at file contents again. We expect visit to have been replaced with visit count. So let's look at file contents. It doesn't look like it actually got replaced. That's a little bit confusing. I wonder why. Could it be because it didn't actually find this string? It doesn't seem likely. So what I'm going to do is let's look a little bit more closely at this replace function. So let's look at, I'm just going to search for JavaScript string replace. And let's see if reading what this function does can help us out a little bit. Okay, this is actually really useful. I don't know if you can see this, or I hope you can see this. It says the replace method returns a new string with some or all matches of a pattern replaced by a replacement. So take a second, think about it. What do you think has gone wrong here, that after we ran this replace function, we didn't actually update the string that we sent back to the visitor? So it's because replace doesn't actually change the string. Instead, it does exactly what the definition here says. It returns a new string. So we need to store replace in a new variable instead of just sending file contents back. Nothing's actually been replaced. So I'm going to do this. I'm going to do const final page equals file contents dot replaced. So the replace function returns a new string. And instead of sending the file contents, we want to send that final page out to whoever visits the page. So now I'm going to run the server again. Server seems to be listening. And now if I go to localhost 3000, it says this page has been visited 1 times. And if I keep refreshing it, you can see the page has been visited 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Every time we visit, this counter is going up. So this little template thing here is now doing exactly what we wanted it to do. And we have a dynamic page that can change every time you visit it. Okay. So what else can we do on this page? Well, the first thing that I should probably mention is how to handle what you can do with other handlers. So we've just got a slash handler here. Maybe I want to handle add another kind of route. So to do that, I could just do app.get, and I'm going to call this route random. And it's going to be, again, function request response. And we're going to follow the same kind of pattern. We're going to do const file contents. And this time I'm going to need to make a new template. So instead of this index.html template, I'm going to make a new thing here and call it random. And I'm going to change the name, or I'm going to make a very similar page to this one. In fact, I'm just going to copy all this and paste it in here. But instead of migrate page, it's going to say random name generator. And then it's going to say your new, and you can maybe see where this is going. Your new random name is name. And now back in server, I'm going to load this page and then replace this with a new random name. So I'm going to do similar to what we were doing before. File contents equals fs the read file sync, and we'll read in not the index.html, but this time random.html. And again, remember to tell Node that we want it to be UTF-8. And then we need to get a new random name. How do we get a new random name? Well, what we do is we use that random or that chance library that we had before. So I'm going to do const chance. I'm going to use the capitalization convention that the documentation for chance wanted to use. To require chance. And then here, where we're kind of this space similar to P5 setup. So you have time here to kind of set up your variables. And I'm going to do let my chance equals new chance. That was the syntax, right? You do it new chance, not, yeah. So after we've loaded the file contents here, we'll do const random or new name equals my chance.name. So new name will be a new random name. And then finally, we'll do const final page equals file contents dot replace. And this time we're replacing %% name with new name. And then response dot send final page. And that should be it. That should be it. So now our server is ready. And if I run this thing again, if we go to the root page here, you'll notice too, by the way, that this visit counter has reset. And that's because the page, that variable only lasts as long as the server has been running. We will see in later classes how to deal with that. For now, just notice it. So this is the empty path that we're visiting here. But if I now go to /random, it says here we're visiting our random name generator page, and my new random name is Vincent Cooper. Cool name. Reload. Bessie Williams, also a great name. Clara Malone. These are like strong. I feel like these are names you would find in like a, I don't know, 20th century detective novel or something. Especially Clara Malone. That's definitely a detective novel name. So yeah, you can. So the point that I want to get across here is that what's determining which of these handlers gets run is this path piece here. So / means the empty path, /random means because it's I've written /random here. We're using this path and not the empty one. Okay. So we had to know before, if we were just at the home page, there's no way to get to the random page unless you type it into the address bar. We can add a link to that pretty easily, right? To do that, we would just come into index and do something like this, p, and then a, href is, and this is the important bit, right, is that we can actually link in the usual HTML way to other parts of our own page. So I can do /random, and I can write click here to get a new random name. And now, I don't think I have to restart the server to do this. If I just push refresh, yeah, so I've changed the file and the server is actually fetching the file, reading the file from disk every time it serves the page. So I don't even have to restart if I change the server file, this is like defining the server itself. So if I change this, I have to restart the server. But if I change one of these template files, I don't actually have to restart the server to see the changes. And now you can see there's a link here. Click here to get a new random name. If I click this, it takes us to the random name generator, which calls us Jeremiah Owen. These are such strong names. Yeah, so we can use these anchor tags in our templates to send us between pages. And of course, where this thing actually sends you, even this, remember, this is just a string. So even here where it says /random, that could be something like %% link. And then in your server, you could have a link or some text or something that points randomly to a new different page or takes you to some a specific page or something that might be important for you in the homework. More about that when we get to the homework part. Okay, so there's just one last two last things that I want to show you. The first is a little something called middleware. Now I don't want to go too deep into middleware because it's it's not necessarily that complicated, but it might be a bit more than we need to consider. The point is that what middleware does is it does something between when the Express application gets the request and when it actually gets to you in here so that you can handle it. So by installing middleware, what we're calling it is installation, you're telling Express that you want it to do something to any requests that come in before they get to you. So one thing in particular that we can do is install a static handler. So I can do something like this, app.use, which is how you say use some middleware. And I'm going to install a static handler. I'm going to do it like this, express.static static. I'm going to call this CSS. So what I'm doing right here is telling the server that it should serve a local folder called CSS as if it were just static. What that means is when the server gets a request, it will check to see if there is a file with that name in a directory called CSS. If there is, it will just serve the contents of that file without doing anything else fancy to it. Why is this useful? Well, I can come back into our directory and add a new folder called CSS. And in it, I can just make a new file called style.css. And I'm just going to do something extremely basic, like make the background color. Let's make it something easy on the eyes, like burly wood, a burly wood background color. So now there's this file style.css that the server has been configured to serve statically if it gets such a request. How do we make it get such a request? Well, let's go into index.html, and I'm going to add this CSS file to the HTML. So we'll add a header, not like this. And then how do you add CSS again? You do, it's a link. It's a link? It's a, oh my God, how do you add CSS? It's not style. Is it link? Ref? How do you add? This is so embarrassing. Add CSS to HTML. I just want to point out that I'm a professional developer and I write programs every day professionally. How do you do it? It's not like this. I knew it was link the whole time. I was just testing you. It's link, rel equals style sheet. Yes, okay. Now in hindsight, it's very obvious. And all the href is just going to be style.css. One slightly important thing, the href is not CSS / style.css. It's just style.css. Why? Because in server.js, we said to serve from the CSS folder. And just something else too, well, okay, hold on. We'll get to that in a second. CSS folder. So that means now that if I come back, and because I changed the server, I've got to restart the server. So we'll stop the server and then restart the server and go back to our page and reload it. And now it's loading that style sheet and we're seeing the nice background. Of course, we didn't include the style sheet in the random name generator, so you don't see it here, but we very easily could have. So yeah, the thing that I wanted to say about the CSS, about this static thing rather, is that you don't have to just serve one folder. You could do app.use and then also do express.static image, and then you could have another folder that was for images, for example. Not actually going to do that. I'm going to comment this out, but I'm just going to write, you can serve as many let's do it like this. You can serve multiple static directories if you want. Okay, so that's how you add some kind of static components, or you can serve static content. The reason you have to do this is because when the page tries to load this index.html, this style tag tells it, okay, you've loaded this page, but there's actually one more resource you need to fetch, and it's called style.css. So when when your web page loads this, it's going to see there's another thing that it needs to load, and it's going to make a separate request to the server. And that's when Express is going to help you out and just spit back the CSS file. Okay. One last thing that I want to cover is how to deal with forms. So say, for example, you wanted to get a person's name, right? So say when you visited the page could be like, hey, please introduce yourself. What's your name? So I'm going to make a new template here, and I'm going to call it nameform.html. I'm just going to put a very simple HTML form in here. So we'll do form, and we'll do action. Okay, so the form has a couple of important parts. The first part is the method, and this is the HTML verb that I was talking about before. And because we're posting some stuff, or rather because we're pushing some content, I'm going to use the post verb. Remember, get and post were the two major verbs that I talked about. So this is important later because when we add to our server a handler for this form, we're going to need to make sure that we use a post handler and not a get handler. You can have post and get handlers with the same path, but depending on whether the client uses a post or get verb, it's going to be different. Now, action, this is also important. This is going to be the path for the handler in our server. I'm just going to call this name. So this is for posting the name. Okay. And then I'm going to do something like this. I'm going to add a label, an input, and then a button to submit. So the label will just be for name, and then the contents of the label will be, what's your name? Question mark. Now we'll add an input. The type is text, and the name, rather the ID I should say, or the name is name. And then finally we have another input, type is submit. Okay, so here's our name form. Now I want to add this into the index.html page. Does that make sense? I'm going to take the contents of this template and stick it in this HTML page. So to do that, I'm just going to do this, name form. And then back here in our server, after doing, so now we don't really have this final page anymore. We have something a bit more like this. We'll have let updated page equals file contents replace visit count, and then updated page equals updated page dot replace. Or rather, we should do this too. We'll do const form file contents equals fs.read file sync templates slash nameform.html, reading it as UTF-8. So we'll replace %% name form with form file contents. And finally, we'll send out the updated page. So now if I restart the server and visit the home page, we should see, look at this, a new place to insert our, I don't like that the first suggestion is Alex Jones. I must have thought I was being very funny at some point. But here's a space to tell the server what your name is. And then some dangling %, which is kind of surprising to me. I wonder why that's there. It's because I forgot to write %, at the end of name form here, but that's okay. Anyway, there's a form to put in our name. I'm going to type Alex Jones and push submit, and it says cannot post name. What does this mean? It means that we haven't added a name handler to our server yet. So the server is telling us that it couldn't figure out what to do with that. But other than that, everything seems to basically be working. So let's add a post handler, app.post, and then remember the handler path is called name, and we'll have a function, request, response. Now this is where things actually get interesting. So up until now, we've been totally ignoring the request and just sending back the same response no matter what the request is. This time we actually want to use the request and see what's in there. Because when somebody posts a form, the request is going to have some information in it that we can use. So in order to do that, we have to do one thing quickly, which is install another piece of app middleware. And this tells Express how to format the incoming request in such a way that we can easily see what was in the form. So I'm just going to do app.use express dot, and then express dot, and this particular piece of middleware is URL encoded. It's nice that these are two built-in Express middlewares. They weren't always built-in Express middlewares, by the way. Back in my day, they weren't, and it was, I don't know really why I'm complaining. Anyway, we'll just do extended true. Don't necessarily worry about what all this means. The important takeaway here is that this lets you read form contents easily. But you can feel free to dig in, and it might be helpful for you to dig in on your own into what exactly is going on here. But the upshot is that now down here in our post function, we can do something like this: const name equals request.body.username. And that username, or the fact that this is username, comes from the form. Sorry, it's not username, it's just name. So it comes from the name property of this input tag. So it shouldn't be username, it should actually be name. And then what I want to do is save this person's name and use it later. So up here where there's visit count, I'm also going to do let active name equals, and then for now we'll just set it to undefined. But what we'll do down here is we'll do active name equals name. And then finally what we can do is send the person back to the home page. So we'll do response.redirect, and this redirects to a different page. So we'll do rets.redirect and then just send them back to the home page. So what this has done is taken the form, updated the value of this name variable that we have, and then redirected the person to /. So what I'm going to do now is we can, if we recognize that, or if we've stored the name already, then we don't have to print this name form because we already know, right? So back on the main page, I'll do something like this. I can do if active name is undefined, then we replace the updated page with the name form. Otherwise, we can just say a nice greeting to this person. So we'll do updated page equals updated page dot replace, and now we'll replace name form with something nicer like welcome back, or welcome, and then active name, and then a closing paragraph tag like this. So the first time you visit the page, active name is going to be undefined. So we'll print out this form, add this form to the page that lets the person set their name. After they submit the name, the server will get that request to set the name here and update active name to be the name that was in the form. Then it will redirect back to / to the home page, and then this will load again, or rather we'll get a request for that page again, only this time active name won't be undefined anymore. It will be to something, and we'll print it back to the user. So I'm going to stop and launch the server again. This button probably would do that for me if I just hit this button. Okay, next time I'll hit that button. Going to go to localhost 3000. Here we are, migrate page, and sure enough, it's got the name form here. So I'll hit Alex Jones and then submit, and it says welcome Alex Jones. And notice the page counter incremented because we actually visited this page all over again. But look at that, welcome, it worked, and no matter how many times I reload this, it still says welcome Alex Jones. Pretty neat. It's unfortunate that we have to be Alex Jones in this world, but at least our web page is working. which is pretty handy. So I think that is, and of course you could update, this says click here to get a new random name. We could update this so that the random thing changed your active name. Anyway, there's a bunch of stuff you could do there. So this is actually where I'm going to end the lecture portion of this and talk to you about what the homework is going to be this week. So what I want you to do for homework is make a new Git repository and make a page like this, but with a little bit of a creative twist on it. So there's a page, if you go to silly suggestion dot, what's it called? Silly, I'm trying to remember the name of the URL where I put the Heroku app. It's on Heroku. HerokuApp.com, like this. Yes. If you go to silly-suggestion, all this will be in an email to you, but if you go to silly-suggestion.herokuapp.com, it will take you to a page like this. Hallway, you're standing in a hallway. To the left is a big room. So you go left into the big room. Standing in a big room. It's so big, there's a heavy looking door. Open the door. You can't unlock the door. So go back to the hallway. Let's go in the small room. Pick up the key. You picked up the key. Go back. Go to the hallway. Check your inventory. You have a key. Back once you can. Go to the big room. We're here in the big room. Open the door. We did it. We opened the door with the key. We made it out into the world. Incredible. We are so skilled at computer games. So I want you to make something like this. It doesn't have to be in a fantasy setting. It can be, wherever you want. Sorry, I was trying to find let's see, github.com. I'm just trying to find the homework description here. So homework 1. It says turn it by Friday, February 11th. Ignore that. That's not actually the right date. It should just be due, it'll be just due on Sunday at midnight. So it doesn't have to be a fantasy setting, but it does have to have branching paths. It does have to have some kind of inventory. It does have to have a good ending and a bad ending, although the meaning of good and bad is up to you. There's no need for a fantasy theme. It can have whatever theme you want. But I encourage you to be creative. Now, there are some optional requirements as well. So for example, you could use, we loaded a CSS file to change the background color. You could think of a way to maybe load a different CSS file or to change CSS classes depending on what's in your inventory, what the weather is, something like that, to make it a more immersive game. You could also add some random elements so that the game is not always the same. You could use a form to let the user input something. You could add background music, images. There's a lot of room for creativity here. And I want to show you some of the projects that people did last year. I will find a way to put the projects from last year up so that you can see them. I have to do a little bit of work to reconfigure it, but I don't think it's too crazy. But let me just go to NYU. Let me find them really quick. Yeah, okay. Okay, so let me see now, localhost 3000. So here's one from last year. Hello there, welcome to the world of Pokemon. My name is Oak. People call me the Pokemon Prof. Before you go, it's unsafe. Wild Pokemon live in tall grass. You need your own Pokemon for your protection. By the way, none of these are original 150 Pokemon, so I refuse to accept them as true Pokemon, but that's okay. Let's go visit Dust Ox, the poison moth Pokemon. Dust Ox likes margaritas. Well, Dust Ox, who doesn't like margaritas? What is on Dust Ox antennae? Wow, there's nothing on its antennae, and it's angry. It used poison jab, but it missed and you escaped. Oh, thank God it missed. Okay, well, let's go back. Let's visit Delibird. What's in his bag? Oh, nice. We got a no-mel berry. Okay, that's great. In my inventory, we've got a no-mel berry. That's great. I'd love to have a no-mel berry. Let's visit Licky Lily. give them my... Oh no, it didn't like the lemony, the no mail berry, which looked like a lemon to me. So I guess we lose. Anyway, that's one version. Let's see what else we got. Oh, okay, let's see. Can't find modules. All right, npm install. This is actually a very important thing that I should have mentioned, is that when you're, so when you clone a Git, I didn't even talk about cloning a Git repository. All right, well, we have some more things to talk about in a future class, but in general, when you pull a repository for the first time, sometimes you have to run np, because node modules aren't actually installed, you have to run npm install to pull in all the dependencies, and then before they'll actually work. So that's what happened. I tried to run the server and I couldn't find Express, and then I ran npm install to install all the dependencies that this project has, including Express. Now the server is running, and if I go to localhost 3000, so this is another take on the same. Apparently, the computer has noted my presence. There's some, I'm trying to click another button, but I can't actually. It's quite a dynamic, so let's click a button. I'm clicking the button. I feel like this is a cold and unfriendly place without a lot of room to express myself. Oh, I've clicked the button 10 times. It seems I'm doing what I was meant to do. I've been on the page for 35 seconds. I'm unlocking achievements. Oh, and now it's really getting exciting. So yeah, there's a lot of ways that you could take this this homework assignment. Anyway, so yeah, get in touch if you have any questions about that. I'm of course happy to help you out. We haven't worked out office hours yet. I think they're going to be 3 to 5 on Wednesdays, unless it doesn't work for people. Yeah, we'll figure out a time that works. But I guess that's it. Thanks for hanging out through this whole thing, and I'll see you in class on Monday for the reading assignment and to look at or to get started on. So this homework, I should say, won't be due in class on Monday. It'll be due the following Monday, but we're going to start working on this in class on Monday on the 8th. So that's when, so you definitely hopefully you'll watch this video by then, and we'll start working on the homework then in class. But anyway, I'll see you then. Take care. Have a good week. And yeah, see you soon. All right. Bye, guys.